Hello, it's time for bowl pick number 2 for Monday, December 30th, 2013. Almost time for New Year's and the better bowl games, but first we gotta do these ones. This next game I'm predicting is the Franklin Americans Mortgage Music City Bowl. I just call it the Music City Bowl because that's a freaking mouthful. Anyways, this one is between the surprising Ole Miss Rebels out of the SEC and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets out in the ACC. These are two conferences that play each other a lot, but these two teams actually haven't squared off since the 70s, so this will be very intriguing. Let's start with the SEC, Ole Miss. These guys brought in one of the top recruiting classes in the nation this year, including number 1 overall prospect Robert and Kim Diche on the D-line, one of the best names ever. The dude was a monster, their defense was surprisingly stout, and it propelled them to a pretty good season. They started the year off with big wins over Vanderbilt. They had a win over an FCS team, Southeast Missouri State, which was obvious. And then they were able to really dominate Texas 44-23 at Texas. Kind of one of the surprises early on that made people think Mac Brown was going to get fired. Now he is stepping down now, but at the time I was wondering if he was even going to make it to the end of the season after that game. But Ole Miss just looked really strong early on. Their offense was clicking. Their defense was stout. I mean, they gave up 35 at Vanderbilt the first week, but they shut Texas down. But after that, Ole Miss had to play at Alabama, and Bama blanked them 25-0. Then they had to go to Auburn, in one of the roughest 2-week stretches in college football this year. And Auburn didn't really have the hype at the time, but they beat them 30-22. And then, just as if they hadn't had a brutal enough schedule, they followed that up by going to a home game against Texas A&M, who was ninth in the nation at the time. And they got beat 41-38 in a nail-biter. It looked like they had Johnny Football beat, but a late touchdown gave it to Tamu. But Ole Miss still fought, they still clawed, and they pulled off an upset of then number 6 ranked LSU 27-24 to end any chances of them making the title game. And they followed that up with 3 more wins against Idaho, Arkansas, and Troy. So they were looking a solid 7-3 with 2 games left, trying to finish strong, and that's when their offense fell apart. They played against Missouri, who was trying to clinch the SEC East, and Missouri was able to hold out and beat them 24-10, despite kind of a bad offensive game from them, just because Ole Miss their offense just couldn't get anything going in the last 2 weeks. They followed that up by losing in their rivalry game, the Egg Bowl, in Mississippi State, 17-10 in overtime. Anybody can remember there was a fumble in that overtime period that caused the turnover that lost them the game. It was really surprising this year, though, for them. Their defense was supposed to be growing, but not great. And their offense was supposed to kind of sputter at times, but Bo Wallace was really great passing the ball up till his final 2 weeks. He had 3,090 yards, one of only 2 3,000-yard passers in the SEC this year, second best in the SEC. And really, these guys looked surprisingly stout. That defense, they don't give up a lot of points. They were 39th in the nation, giving up 24.3 points per game, and that was against one of the hardest schedules in college football. And their offense was still able to score 30.4 points a game, which is kind of median. It's 59th in the nation, but once again, they played one of the most brutal schedules in college football this year. That SEC schedule was rough on them. It's the team that probably could have won 10 games in many other conferences. They put up about 285 yards a game passing with Bo Wallace. He's going to be kind of the key of this game. He's a great passer. And they also ran for about 187, which is top 50 in the nation. So these guys have a pretty balanced offense, but they lean a little bit on the pass just because Bo Wallace has been so good. But that's also what cost him late in the year when he had issues. I've heard rumors he might have been suffering from some kind of injury or something. Anyways, let's go on and talk about the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets now. These guys, coming off their big win over USC last year in the bowl game down south, this year they came in and they ran all over teams again, 4th in the nation with 311 yards a game. It showed big early on after an obvious win over Elon, an FCS team. They played Duke and North Carolina back-to-back, 2 teams that made bowl games. North Carolina one that already won, and they beat both of them. They beat Duke 38-14, their worst loss on the year outside of Florida State at the end. I mean, they looked really good, but then they followed that up with 3 straight losses to Virginia Tech, Miami, and BYU. Those were all good teams. All three teams made bowl games, although two of the three have lost so far, and the other one hasn't played. But they're still all solid teams this year. But Georgia Tech followed that up with a big win, 56 to nothing over Syracuse, another team that was in a bowl game and just won actually. And then they were able to beat Virginia and Pitt 21 to 10. They finished the year with two of their three harder games on the year. In between was a game against Alabama A&M that they dominated 66 to 7, but their other two games against and then 8th-ranked Clemson and Georgia they lost, including the Georgia game being a 41-34 heartbreaker in double overtime. Aaron Murray just wanted to. I don't know. But these guys, I don't know. They're hard to get a read on. When they run the ball well, they're unstoppable, but they only throw for about 129 yards a game, which is one of the worst in the nation. So when they can't run the ball, they're in trouble. And Ole Miss has a really stout run defense, so this is going to get interesting. Um, they do score about 36 points a game, which is one of the top 25 teams, and they also only gave up about 22. So their defense is actually not that bad. I mean, their defense is usually able to make some pretty good stops, and they're usually able to score points, but this one's going to be hard for them. I think for them to have any sort of chance, they're going to have to get on the board early because Ole Miss isn't great at playing from behind. They had the second worst passing defense in the ACC, and Bo Wallace is a great quarterback, so that doesn't line up well for them. They lean on the run, and Ole Miss had a really good run defense, so that doesn't work out well for them. This game just really doesn't bode well. It doesn't favor Georgia Tech. And while I think they're a great team, Ole Miss just has that matchup advantage. I think Bo Wallace is going to have a big day, somewhere probably around 300 yards, probably 2 or 3 touchdowns. I think they'll be able to get a little bit of movement on the ground, maybe get another touchdown there. And I think also there could be a defensive touchdown from Ole Miss in this game, although that might be pushing it. I really think they're going to have somewhere between 28 and 35 points, and I think Georgia Tech's going to have a couple big runs that are going to get them on the board, but I think they're going to struggle through most of this game and probably only end up in the low 20s. So really, overall, I think Ole Miss is going to be able to pull this one out, and I think it's going to come down to the last quarter, probably with Ole Miss pulling away in it, and I think Ole Miss is going to win this by the tune of a score of around 31 to 20.